I see you, big man. The voice, if you could call it that, came from somewhere deep in the mist and smoke that was blowing across the battlefield. All around, burning vehicles, scattered corpses, and shattered wreckage told the tale of the fighting that had happened here. And in the distance, the rumble and retort of gunfire and faint screams marked where the battle still played out. All your ones are dead, I think. All my ones are dead too. It's just us now. The voice sounded like it had long ago forgotten the shape of words, or been twisted beyond the physicality required to form them. The speech bubbled forth, like black water from a long since poisoned well, an assault on the ears of anybody who heard them. Burke sat with his back against the trench wall, a letter held carefully in his massive hand. Beside him, the body of a woman stared lifelessly up at the sky, sword still gripped in her fist as if, at any moment, she might spring back to life to fight some more. She looked calm and peaceful, as if she had barely felt whatever calamity it was that had nearly bisected her, a massive ragged wound running across her midsection, exposing her innards down to the spine. He put the letter back in its envelope, folded it gently, and placed it carefully in his trouser pocket. He leaned over, his large calloused hands gently running down the woman's face, closing her eyes to the horrors all around them. The trench was filled with weapons and destroyed equipment, the bodies of humans and demons alike, tossed around like so much discarded meat. To Burke, she still seemed vital somehow, a desperate thread of hope attached to an impossible future where she would walk and talk and breathe again. The voice came once more, unwanted, unbidden, as unwelcome here as the very war that had brought them all to this place. I'd fight you, big man. I'd test you. I saw you damn near pull the head off a man, and I know I chopped a few off myself. And come to me now and face me here. You die with honor, and who knows? It might be heaven I send you to, not hell. The voice laughed, and Burke somehow found it in himself to stand, dragging the great emptiness that threatened to swallow him whole with him. He was a massive man, standing 6 feet and 8 inches tall, and weighing the guts of 300 pounds. His hair was a peppery brown, and his eyes burned with an intelligence that most people missed, assuming the big man was slow. His whole life, people had mistaken Burke's careful consideration for those around him as a lack of wit, his delicate movements for slowness. On the battlefield, Burke was a whole different animal. The ponderous care with which he moved through the world was abandoned, and he became an implement of destruction. Faster than a man his size had any right to be, agile, powerful, and precise. It was only there that he could really be what he had been born to be, and his mind and body burned brightest when given free rein to visit destruction upon his enemies. Members of every barracks in New Antioch knew of Burke, and everywhere the rumors followed him. The whispers said he had been a member of the mechanized heavy infantry, the only one to ever give up the suit. It always made him laugh. There was no great mystery to it. He was just big, and unlike most big men, he was fast. He was what he was, made by God in the truest sense. There had been none of the church's potions or prayers involved. He climbed up and out of the trench, then walked slowly down into the crater where the thing was standing. 2 gladiators meeting in a makeshift amphitheater that would last only for as long as it took for the next shell to land. The landscape of this battle was an ever-changing, ever-shifting mess, and all its architecture had an impermanence that belied the stakes of the greater war. He came to a halt about 10 feet from the creature, his massive shotgun, designed to punch holes through werewolves, grasped in his hands. He rarely ran into a man as big as he was, or at least one who hadn't been fed the communicant concoctions of the church. But the creature that stood across from him was more than his match for sheer size. Face hidden away behind a horned helmet, heavily muscled arms protruded from thick metal armor that covered its chest and shoulders. The flesh was blackened and burned, oozing blood and rancid pus dripping to the ground at its feet. Had he been asked, Burke couldn't have explained why he didn't just shoot the thing. "I was a man once," it uttered, "but there was something broken inside me, something I couldn't even name." The thing reached up and pulled off the helmet, exposing a face that had been twisted and contorted, made bestial and strange through injury and abuse, and some infernal power that had tugged and pulled at the flesh and bones of it until it resembled something from a nightmare. I didn't understand what was wrong with me. I wanted to stand apart, while others sought the comfort of company. It was when I killed my first man that I knew what I was, and so I killed many more. The road my life took brought me to the edges of the Lake of Inferno, and as I stood there and stared into the flames, I finally knew what I was. I was a hunter and a killer of men, but more than that, I was a victim of Yahweh, of your tyrant God. Had he not made me, yet he had denied me that final part of humanity, that thing to make me whole. I walked willingly into the flames, big man, and I found it there, waiting for me. He undid the buckles of his armor, pulling the dense plating away from his burned flesh, and Burke could see deep sigils carved into it, the flesh red and raw where the blade had dug all the way down to the muscle. I was anointed and made complete. I was redeemed and saved from the judgmental eyes of your God. The torso beneath the armor was almost freakishly muscled, great slabs of flesh growing over each other, coiled like serpents where they had been torn and stitched together again and again. The man thing tilted his head back toward where Burke had come from, deep in the trench. "I think your woman is back there. After hundreds of years, you taste all the different pains that a man can feel. When you kill his parents, his brothers, his sisters, his child and his woman taste best. There's a sting to it, as he knows his future has died." He cracked his knuckles, the sound hard and sharp against the soft morning. "It wasn't me that killed her, though I wish it was. Is that why you came to me? Is that why you stand there now?" The creature laughed, hand on his belly and his head thrown back, as if all of this was hilarious to him, a grand play acted out on a stage with an eager audience. "Do you seek death, big man?" Burke just looked at him, having not said a word this entire time. He closed his eyes, seeing her face, calm and peaceful not 30 feet away, and he breathed deep, imagining that he could still catch the scent of her hair as more than just a memory. He enjoyed the look of surprise on the thing's face as he suddenly shuffled forward, light feet eating up the distances between them, swinging the shotgun like a club, knowing the creature would block it with one massive arm. As the weapon connected with its arm, he shifted on his toes, driving his left fist deep into the muscles and bone of the ribs on the lower side of its abdomen. He heard the crack of bones, but the hellish warrior didn't even react, instead tearing the shotgun from Burke's grip and hurling it away with one hand, the other arm lashing out with a vicious right cross. Burke sidestepped it easily, twisting off to the creature's right to slip the punch and slamming a hard combination into the ribs again, before throwing a brutal lead hook, smashing his fist hard into the twisted jaw of his opponent. The Anointed laughed mockingly. "You're fast, big man," he rejoiced, stepping in and swinging a punch of his own. Burke ducked under it, too late realizing that it was what the beast expected of him, and his vision blurred as he felt the creature's other arm crash down across the top of his back, smashing him across the neck. The power of the blow drove him to one knee, but he somehow had the wherewithal to roll to the side as his enemy swung a brutal kick right through where he had been. If he'd stayed, the kick would definitely have broken some ribs, if not worse. Burke was going to feel that kind of injury, even if his opponent didn't. He exploded upward, driving an uppercut right into the chin, but following through and grabbing the back of the Anointed's head, dragging it forward as he drove his own forehead right into the center of its face. He felt the wasted mass of cartilage and gristle that acted as a nose shatter, feeling rank, clotted blood splatter all over his face. The stench made him want to gag, the hideous foulness of it driving him backward as he tried to wipe it off his face. The Anointed laughed again, following him, hard looping shots coming in fast. Burke covered up, but even when they landed on his arms and shoulders, it was enough to cause a jarring pain, and a numbness was swiftly following. Where they landed on his body, he felt an almost grotesque level of pain, and he knew that the monster was doing real damage. He couldn't last long against this kind of onslaught. Then, out of nowhere, like a bolt of lightning, the thing landed a vicious right hook to his jaw, and he was unconscious and falling. Burke found himself standing at an altar, his subconscious mind reaching out to anything that would offer a firm grip, a way back to the real world. He remembered this place, and he would remember it for the rest of his life. As a sergeant, he had been entitled to get married in any of the chapels in New Antioch, but they had opted for the small intimacy of the barracks church. It was familiar, and felt more natural than the finery of the big spaces where the more important people gathered to proclaim their faith. He could remember her standing across from him, dress uniform pressed within an inch of its life, her hair long and golden in a simple ponytail, no hats in church, so both had their dress caps under their arms. He couldn't remember exactly what the priest had said, but it was just them in the room. He once again couldn't believe his luck, his blessing. What king had ever known riches who had not heard her voice? What poet had ever known joy who had never had the opportunity to describe her beauty? Watching her fight was like seeing a Valkyrie descend upon the battlefield, and yet it was him that she loved most in all the world. They had said their vows and went on their way, and guarded their love jealously in a world that was turned to madness. They were aware of the reality of the war and their place in it, and had written each other letters, only to be read by the other on the day of their death. Then, together, they had walked out to face whatever it was that hell had in store for them, because despite their desire to run and hide and just be alone together forever, they knew that forever would never come as long as the hordes of hell marched through the gate. That had been 5 years prior. He'd been fighting on another part of the line when word came through on the radio that her unit was dead. All of them. And so he'd left his post, making his way 2 miles to the east, ignoring everything around him until he found where his own private world had ended, in a nameless trench, on a godforsaken battlefield, in the middle of the no man's land. The creature's next shot woke him up, the impact of it breaking his cheekbone, sending a bolt of pain through him like a current. The one after that broke his nose, and the third his jaw. They rained down on him like clubs, and without realizing his hand had even closed around it, he stabbed upwards, jamming a shard of torn tank track into the Anointed's neck. The monster reared back, the sudden shock of the attack taking it by surprise. It reached out and could just feel the end of the shard of metal sticking out of its flesh, fingers closing it around it and pulling it out. The sickly, clotted blood that coursed through its veins ran down its chest like a flood as the meat of its neck parted, and the Anointed roared, as much in anger as in any sort of pain. Burke had managed to get to his feet, and the Anointed stepped in, ramming the metal shard deep into his stomach. As violent and brutal as the fight had been, the pretense that it was anything other than two men trying to kill each other was now over. Both were cut deep and bleeding fast, but Burke had no idea how much blood the thing he fought could lose before it would fall down, while he was intimately aware that it wouldn't take long for him to bleed out, and half his face felt like it had been caved in with a hammer. He reached out, still faster than he had any right to be despite the damage, and he wrapped his massive hands around the deformed biceps of his enemy. The Anointed's face twisted into something that once could have been a smile, mistaking Burke's action for a stumble and an attempt to stop himself from falling. "You'll join your woman soon. Have no fear," he gloated. Too late, he realized Burke's plan. The big man gripped tight with his vice-like fingers and ran his hands down the burned and blistered arms. The skin peeled and tore away like a glove, ripping from the bicep all the way down to the wrist. And for the first time since they had started fighting, the Anointed grunted in pain. And Burke stepped in close, once again driving his forehead straight into the nose of the enemy, and while he felt excruciating pain running through his own face, bad enough to blind him, he was close to the enemy now, and he didn't need to see. He allowed his hands to flow upwards, past the beast's great shoulders, cupping him around the back of the head and dragging him forward from the neck, pulling the head down as he stepped out and brought his knee up, feeling the hardness of it smashing into the Anointed's face and hearing a terrible crack as bone buckled and shifted. Dazed and confused by the hellacious onslaught from an enemy who, just mere seconds ago, was getting beaten to death, the Anointed toppled, reaching out with an arm to keep himself from falling over. Blood poured from its neck and mouth, the destroyed palate reducing what was almost impossible to understand to nothing but a viscous, wet gurgle. Off to the side, Burke stepped in and stomped hard into the side of the arm that was supporting the Anointed. The bones snapped and cracked, elbow driven the wrong way as the beast went down. It had no choice but to roll onto its back, but Burke was already above it, stomping down on its throat, the sickly wet snap of its larynx rupturing beneath his boot. He kneeled, a knee on either side of the creature's chest, and started raining down blows onto its face. All he could think about was the letter he had written and given to her when they'd gotten married. He was not an eloquent man, but he had done his best to tell her how much he loved her, how she was the moon and the stars to him. He desperately hoped she'd broken the promise and read it, maybe even that very morning. Maybe as the blade cut through her, she'd had those words in her mind, and there had been some comfort there in her final moments. The effort of inflicting damage on the Anointed was becoming too much, and he could feel the blood still running out from his belly, and the hot growing aches as swelling in his face forced broken bones into places they shouldn't be. Another agony was coming, it seemed. The thing beneath him wasn't moving anymore, just a mess of meat where its face had been, breathing coming in ragged, violent bursts. Its body was failing, too much blood loss and damage to fight anymore. He dragged himself to his feet, crossing to the other side of the crater where the beast had thrown his shotgun, bending down with a grunt and picking it up one-handed. He walked back to where the thing lay, wheezing and gurgling as the last of its blood ran out of it. Staring into his eyes, focusing only on them, Burke could almost mistake it for nothing more than a man. And in those eyes, he saw a familiar sight. "You're scared," he said, matter-of-factly. Whatever was awaiting this thing in hell, it didn't want to go back there. The Anointed tried to push the barrel of the shotgun away, but it was too weak, and whatever words it was trying to form were just coming out of its ruined face as a wet whisper. He pulled the trigger, and a shell's worth of tungsten orichalcum alloy shot turned the thing's head to pulp. Burke turned, dropping the gun and nearly falling as all the damage from the fight suddenly rushed home for attention. Even when blows had been blocked or glanced off his arms and shoulders, they had done some sort of damage, and he felt like he had been worked over by 5 of the Duke's best MPs armed with nightsticks and a grudge. He made his way back to the trench, slipping down into it and walking until he found what had once been a medic. He leaned down, pulling at the corpse until he had its supply bag in hand, then making his way back to where she was lying. He pulled some gauze from the pack, balling it up and stuffing it into the stab wound in his stomach. There was a morphine vial in the bag, and he snapped it and jabbed it into his arm. It would dull the growing storm in his face for a while at least. He got back to her body, sitting down beside it and pulling the letter from his pocket once more. While he may not have been eloquent, he was a poet compared to her, and he looked at the 2 words written on the page that she knew he would never read unless she was dead. His hands got blood and mud along the edges as he tried to hold it as gently as he could. He didn't want to get the grime of war on it, but he couldn't fight the urge to see the swoop and curve of her handwriting. Stay alive. The 2 words filled the width of the page, underlined for emphasis. Burke had always been prone to finding the thickest of the fighting, and wasn't known for backing down from anything. He once again put the letter back in his pocket, covering her body with a discarded cloak. He sat back against the wall of the trench, head back and looking toward the sky. How easy it would have been to just let go while fighting the creature, to let that be the end of it, and to join her in whatever came after. Somehow he got to his feet, her body held in his hands, and started making his way back to his own unit. There would be a price to pay for leaving his squad, but he didn't care. He couldn't leave her there, not after the news had reached him. He had done a lot of things in his life that he regretted, but he'd never let that be one of them. Slowly, the pain in his face and stomach growing to sharp, pointed crescendos, he made his way back to where his squad had been, and to whatever awaited him there. A reprimand, surely, perhaps a demotion, and maybe even dismissal from the squad. All would be deserved, but were prices he'd pay 100 times over rather than leave her there amidst the ruin. As he carried what was left of his future across the torn-up trenches and blasted craters, he thought about those 2 words and what they meant. It was not a call to cowardice, not from she who had known him so well. She knew what Burke was, and the things that made him up, and the thoughts that defined him. Instead, he took it as the simple instruction it was meant to be. He'd stay alive until something managed to get the better of him. He'd fight until he lost the worst way, and on that day, he'd see her again.